Garp.
Garp.
Garp?
Yes, Garp.
Sounds like a fish. My daughter got knocked up by a garp. Find out if that's the son of a bitch's first name or last name.
Was that his first name or last name, dear?
It was Garp. Just Garp. That's the whole thing.
I think it was his last name.
What was his first name?
I never found out.
She never found out his first name?
Jenny, you must know his first name.
Technical Sergeant Garp.
I knew it. I knew it. A goddamn soldier.
Technical Sergeant?
T.S.
Hello, and welcome to episode 6 of Trash Talk, Every Frame a Dumpster Fire. Today we will be discussing the movie World According to Garp. I'm TK, creator of all things trash, creator of this podcast, streams, everything, and I'm joined by my co-host Eric.
Hello there.
Yeah, let's get into it.
All right. World According to Garp. This movie came out in 1982, starring Robin Williams, Mary Beth Hart, and Glenn Close in her film debut. She would, of course, go on to do a lot of really good movies. This is directed by George Roy Hill, who directed a lot of really big, important movies in the 60s and 70s. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Slaughterhouse-5, Slapshot, The Sting. So this movie has some pedigree and some heavy hitters behind it, and it's a sort of comedy drama with some real sucker punches to go along with its story.
Yeah.
This is emotional devastation if you're not prepared for it.
So, I think, I watched this a lot more recently than the other movie we talked about today, Battleship. I watched this just a couple days ago. I think the number one takeaway that I had from this, the thing I wanted to open up the podcast with, is that, just to sort of preface it with, this movie covers a lot of things that I myself, as a fairly privileged, middle-class, cis white man, don't feel qualified to really have too much of a strong opinion on. I mean, there's clearly a wrong opinion to have, and I'm fairly confident that I know the wrong opinion to have, but I don't pretend to understand the struggles or any of the things that some of the types of people depicted in this movie experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to get that out of the way, because I do think that's important to say. We're just covering this from the point of view of people who like movies. We're not trying to weigh in too much on the state of the world or social justice or any of that, because I don't feel qualified at the very least.
Sure, we're certainly not positing a direction for these sorts of things, but it's a movie from 1982, adapted from a novel from the 1970s, which was a period of a lot of sort of social change, a lot of change in direction, consideration of a lot of issues like, early back then, a lot of feminist issues, trans rights came up, even as far as back then, though they certainly weren't dealt with as comprehensively as they are nowadays. But this is an interesting movie in that it deals with a lot of these topics with a lot more sensitivity and depth than something you'd normally expect from something from the 70s or 80s.
That's what surprised me. Or not necessarily surprised me, because I kind of knew going in that it was that, but impressed me. It's a very, for the time, very progressive movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I did like that. I felt like, I honestly, I don't know if I just wasn't, to a certain degree, the movie reflected myself back on me. I didn't find it very comedic. I honestly didn't find this movie funny.
It isn't in what you'd normally expect of a Robin Williams kind of movie. It's not like a Mrs. Doubtfire or Genie and Aladdin kind of quirky comedy. It's the comedy comes from a lot of black humor, sort of absurdity, dark irony. Yeah. It's about the messiness of life and the human condition.
I think there were a couple points where I did laugh, and a couple points where I felt like I was supposed to laugh, but I was so uncomfortable. Like when I felt like the whole situation with Garp and his mother and the prostitute in the coffee shop was meant to be comedic, and to a certain degree it was comedic, but it was also so awkward.
It's a bit of awkwardness, cringe comedy, sort of like what
Yeah.
you get like in a show like The Office. The humor in that scene is character driven. It's that the mother in this Jenny Fields is just so on another planet when it comes to her thinking compared to so many other people of this time period, that she'd engage a prostitute and be like genuinely curious, fairly like non-judgmental, sort of, you know, ask her about her thoughts, her feelings, her approach to these things.
While also being, at least at the start of it, pretty naive.
Yes.
Like the whole situation starts with they pass a number of women on the street, and she asks Garp, "Is that the style today?" And he basically insinuates through
It's
a
the world's
comedic
oldest
remark
profession.
that they are prostitutes, and she is surprised, and then decides that they need to go talk to one. And
Yeah. She's naive, fearless, and curious all at the same time. But before we like dive into all the wonderful, wonderful characters of this movie, what is the world according to Garp all about? To me, it's really an episodic movie. Like you get snapshots of characters' lives that go on for like 20 to 40 minutes, and it's sort of, you jump forward in time a lot. But it starts with the mother, Jenny Fields, played by Glenn Close, who got an Oscar nomination for this role. But it starts with her talking to her parents, saying how she got impregnated while she was working as a as a nurse
as
in World War II.
a nurse in World War II. Yeah. And it starts right off with her being completely confident in her opinion that the views of the world just are wrong.
Mm-hmm.
This idea that she needs to get married, she needs to have a husband. She didn't want to get married. She didn't want to have a husband. She didn't want to share
She
her
wanted
life.
she wanted a child.
She wanted a child, and that's it. So she found a donor of sorts.
Yes, she ended up finding a technical sergeant, Garp, who experienced a combat injury, who was brain damaged quickly on his way out, and he suffered from priapism, which is, you know, a condition where you get pretty spontaneous and relentless erections, and she ended up using him for her purposes of getting a child. Certain characters have an objection to this, but for her it seemed all perfectly normal. It sort of goes to her characterization. She doesn't connect sex and love. For her, sex and lust go together.
Yeah.
You know, it's a very negative connotation for her. So for her, this was simply a transaction. You know, there's no love or even like traditional sex associated with it. It's simply a transaction. You know, and this sort of carries her forward.
And that's how we get Garp.
That's how we get Garp. And she's, by, you know, pretty much all depictions in this movie, a wonderful, caring mother, if perhaps a little overbearing.
And a little
unconventional.
Unconventional is the exact word I was trying to think of.
But she's clearly loving and caring. You know, we see later several scenes with Garp as a kid. She's appropriately outraged when the neighbor's dog attacks Garp. She saves Garp when he gets up on the building and is pretending to be a pilot way up there, and slides off.
When he was, I think, sleepwalking. I think that was the.
I don't think he was sleepwalking.
That was my assumption, was that he was sleepwalk pretending to be a pilot, but I could be wrong.
He does have a very active imagination.
Yes.
He also has a void in his life. He wants a father. This is a big part of the character, Robin Williams' character as Garp going forward, is that he doesn't have a father. He fantasizes about his father as this sort of pilot and hero character to him, you know, and he goes through much of his life not experiencing this and wanting it. That sort of defines him going forward.
I think, yeah, a big part of that, I'm sure, would have been the societal view of him as the bastard son of,
Yes.
and that comes up throughout the movie, that he is a bastard son, right? That would have reinforced that need for a father.
And part of his journey is realizing my mother was all I needed in the first place. She gave me everything I needed. I may not be perfect. It's part of his sort of coming to grips with life and self-acceptance, but that's one of the big themes is forgiveness and learning to appreciate what you got. But we get flash forward. Jenny's working as a nurse on this university campus. Garp is going to school there as well. He falls in love with
the daughter of his wrestling coach.
Yes, character Helen Holm, or pardon me, yeah, Helen, and tries to woo her pretty unsuccessfully for quite a while. He's a pretty awkward but charming young man. He wants to be an author, so he tries to impress her through writing short stories. At the same time, he has this childhood friend that he sort of fools around with and gets caught with. And she doesn't appreciate that, but after long enough time apart, they sort of come back together again. After he's a sort of successful writer and author who moves to New York.
Yes, he moves to New York. His mother also
Comes with
obviously
him.
moves to New York, and that's where they run. Well, they're living in New York. They're out shopping, and that's where they run into the situation with the prostitutes.
Mm-hmm.
And that interaction is what leads her to write her very long book. It seems
It's a political manifesto. Yes.
About the world and the state of women in the world and their rights and she organizes to take her book to a publisher. And again, being the naive, in a way, woman that she is, and very confident,
Naive and fearless.
almost arrogant in a way, just assumes that her book is perfect and he will publish it. And she is not asking him for the privilege of having her book published. She is bestowing upon this publisher the great honor of publishing her book. And this is sort of poignantly demonstrated by her dropping off the book, discussing it with him for a short time, and then leaving with the phrase, "I'll call you." As in, I'll call you. I know you want to publish this. I'll call you later to figure out the details.
Yeah.
At the same time, Garp leaves his short story.
Garp is the far more technical writer. He sort of writes short stories. He's a lot more imaginative, symbolic, whereas Jenny is a lot more like brusque, to the point, very matter of fact.
Yes.
And Garp kind of resents her success as an author in a way.
So yes, as it turns out, despite the fact that she was completely, I think, misguided on how the publisher-writer relationship was going to go, it happens that her book, she timed it very, very conveniently, that the culture in America and the world at the time was such that they were very some would be very receptive of this kind of book.
Mm-hmm.
And it generates a lot of discussion and a lot of outrage.
Yeah,
and
it's sort of meant to represent a lot of where sort of academic feminism sort of went in the 70s and 80s. A lot more observations of patriarchal power structures, abuse of women, using sex as a means of oppression and as a tool of oppression. All these sorts of things really came to the forefront in the 70s and the 80s and drew a lot of ire from more traditionalist camps, which is why the first time that she appears to give a speech about her book, there's an attempted assassination.
Yes, not the last.
Not the last. Every time she speaks in public, it's someone wants to assassinate her. It's truly impressive.
And we get a bit of a fast forward again, and Garp has married Miss Holm, who's now Miss Garp.
Mrs. Garp.
I guess. I don't know. They never really explain what his name is. T.S. Garp, right?
Technical Sergeant Garp is all she knew of Garp's father.
Yeah.
So it's like, your name is T.S. Garp. Whether Garp was a
So
first name, last name, who
that's
knows?
what
That's
I'm
just
not
what
sure.
she
So
chose.
it's unclear whether his wife becomes Miss Garp, Mrs. Garp. Like what? I don't know how that works.
It's
but,
unclear.
they're married.
What happens when they go to inspect the very first house?
Oh, we're jumping. So you're jumping ahead a bit, right?
Oh, yes.
Because it's before that. It's before a man flies a plane into their house. um, they, I believe, she is pregnant. They haven't had a kid yet, but she's pregnant, and they're going to visit Garp's mother at her house, her very large house, as she is now quite wealthy from the publishment of her book.
Yes, very successful, and she's
and-
sort of turned the house into this refuge for a lot of battered or disenfranchised women who feel
Yep.
alienated
Ranging
from society.
from women who have, I don't remember the name of what they called it, but essentially a phobia of men, a phobia of being around, being touched, being spoken to by men. There is a very important character played by
John Lithgow,
John Lithgow,
Roberta.
Roberta, a trans woman who is sort of Garp's mother's right hand woman,
Hmm.
ex-football player, maybe the best character in this movie in my opinion.
Agreed. Another Oscar-nominated performance there.
I did think, and I don't know if it was done for comedic effect or it was just the time, there were a couple comments that seemed a little silly.
I don't think anything with Roberta was ever played for laughs.
Like the way it was portrayed. So they're for instance, there was a point where they're out for a run,
Mhm.
and she bursts into tears, and her explanation of it being like a woman's hormonal attack. I didn't quite understand if that was meant to
Might have been
mean-
going through like hormone treatment at the time,
That's
and it
what
was
wasn't
just a
clear to me.
comment on that.
Yeah, I wasn't. It felt a little weird. I wasn't sure where they were going with that.
Mhm.
Whether that's what they meant, and if that's what they meant, great. That's that could be a fair assessment. I just wasn't super clear on what they
It's
meant.
not super clear what's going in context, but that was just my assumption.
That is a much. That fits a lot more with the progressive nature of this movie than
Again, none of it's played for laughs. Like
Yeah.
Garp's first encounter is totally just of sympathy and understanding. Becomes a very close friend with Garp and
the
his
family.
family and his kids. Becomes a close personal confidant.
I think one there is definitely a scene with her that is played for laughs, and that's when the angry boyfriend or someone of one of the
women at the
staying at
house,
Garp's
yeah.
mother's house. Wish I could remember her name.
Jenny.
Or what's Garp's mother's name?
Jenny.
Is it Jenny? Okay. Staying at Jenny's house. Angry boyfriend shows up. It's turning into a whole thing. There's going to be a fight between, I think, him and Jenny. He goes to run at her, and basically ex-footballer does what ex-footballer does and slide tackles him.
Mhm.
That was that was fun. I
was great.
enjoyed that.
Yeah.
That was a good, like, standing up for each other kind of. I that scene also felt a little the end of that, like, oh, he's hurt now, I better go take care of him, and she just leaves with him, was a little weird. I was like,
Oh yeah.
is that her sliding back into, like, it? That felt like her sliding back into the societal need to take care of her man, but like,
Well, it's also something similar that you find in abusive relationships.
yeah,
People who take back abusive partners. It's a pretty vicious spiral. This movie doesn't get too much into commenting on that, but it could speak to that. You certainly see a lot more about that. That nowadays there's a lot more commentary and research into the sort of psychology of that. Oh, how could you stay with him when he treats you this way, or
But I love
or vice
him,
versa.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's but yeah, besides that, a very, very good character. And I like they did an okay job with Garp of
He's
that
not
was
a perfect person, but he is very
he tries.
he's very, very accepting and very wholesome in a lot of ways.
There are, I mean, I think a big question that the movie asks later on is one where he takes the side of he ends up on the side that I think most people can relate with. So one of the other groups, to explain, one of the other groups that is staying at Jenny's house is this Society of Women.
The Ellen Jamesians.
So I don't know if Ellen James is actually I don't know that Ellen James is a real person, but this feels like they base it off a real story or something that
I don't know if it's a surrogate or not.
but,
Yeah.
Essentially, the character in the movie, Ellen James, who basically only shows up for a very short period of time near the end, but was a young girl who was assaulted by several men, and then they
Two men, yeah.
removed her tongue so she wouldn't be able to give a description of them to the police or anyone else.
Yeah.
And then there's this Society of Women staying with Jenny, who, in solidarity with her, are removing their own tongues.
Yes.
And Garp, sort of, in this situation, plays the role of abject horror, almost.
Yeah.
Just confusion. And the movie really gets into the question of, first off, the question of, is this really helpful? Is this the right way to approach it?
Is self-mutilation appropriate in this context?
Is self-mutilation appropriate in this context? And then later moves on to, even if the person they are showing solidarity to doesn't agree with what they're doing, should they
continue with the cause?
Like, is it right for them to continue?
Because Ellen James writes to them and asks them, "Thank you for your show of support. Please stop mutilating yourself. It's unnecessary to show support for my cause." And at that point, there's a suggestion that it's not just about Ellen James anymore. To these women, it's really about this militancy or almost like cult-like dedication and zealotry to this cause. You know, for them it means far more than Ellen James. To them, this is their display of power. And as such, there's really very little room for compromise or understanding or for level-headedness beyond this point. Whereas Ellen James preaches a lot more, thank you for your support, please, there are more constructive ways to go about it.
So,
and this is the hill that Garp chooses to die on. He's very much against this practice,
movie, but quite literally,
quite literally,
it's
the hill he dies on.
The hill he dies on. But, I think going back a little bit, talking about the actual, was this a comedy? Wasn't this a comedy? When did I laugh? I think one of the most jovial, funny situations was them dealing with the man who keeps speeding through their neighborhood and not stopping at stoplights.
Yeah.
And shortly after, what's her name? John Lithgow's character,
Roberta.
Shortly after Roberta bursts into tears during their run, Garp is consoling her. They're dealing with it, and then this man who has shown up earlier in the movie, driving his
recklessly in a residential neighborhood
pickup truck, comes speeding around the corner, doesn't stop at the stoplight. He's going way too fast, and Garp absolutely loses it. And Garp knows the route that he takes, and if he cuts through this neighbor's yard, he can cut him off. So he bursts out and runs and cuts him off and grabs a pole from the back of his truck and starts smashing up his truck and yelling and screaming and you think, great, Garp finally took care of it. And then they flip it on you. The guy gets back in his truck and tries to run them down.
Yeah.
And they have to run back through the neighborhood, across the yards and around trees as he's mowing over fences and trying to run them down. And,
yeah. Yeah,
one of the few just light, full-on comedic moments of the movie.
a lot of the humor just arises from odd moments and absurdity. I mean, it's a movie that's really just all about the messiness of life. There's a lot of grotesqueness in this movie, uncomfortableness. Things are unexpected, awkward, cruel, but there's also a lot of beauty and just it's about forgiveness and moving past in a lot of ways, because between Garp and his wife Helen, they both get involved in their own sort of extramarital encounters. Helen gets a job as a teacher, ends up having an affair with one of her graduate students, I believe, and Garp gets involved with
Of
the
course,
babysitter,
the
I believe.
babysitter. Yeah.
So each of them sort of
Though
feel justified in
I
what
think
they're doing.
I think it's fair to say that I don't know if Garp felt justified
Oh yeah, it was too early for that.
because
It's just him.
it was
Yeah.
him almost proving his mother's point that men are lustful and
Exactly.
they don't have control, which
And Garp is particularly has a particularly notable sex drive.
and yeah, the babysitter also clearly interested. She makes it very clear she's 18 to him. Like I to make it
Yeah.
to be clear, like Garp didn't take advantage of her or anything.
No.
She was also very much down for
Down
the
to clown.
events. Sure. But he does cheat on his wife with the babysitter. She asks him if he did. He blindly lies about it, pretends to be outraged by the thought of by the fact that she could even think he did that.
This is where you see
Clearly,
a
they
lot of
both know
flaws in his
he's lying.
character. Yeah.
They're both lying. They both know he's lying, obviously.
And
that in her mind is what gives her the go ahead to cheat.
it's the
student.
difficulties with their relationship overall. Both are sort of experience difficulties with each other and home life and stress and all that. So there's a bunch of factors that sort of contribute to why they think this is appropriate action, and of course it isn't. It all culminates very tragically. There's another sort of setup on payoff with a vehicle. There's what Garp does. They all have a house at the sort of bottom of this sort of cul-de-sac, and it's his tendency to turn off the engine and just coast into the driveway with the lights off when his kids are in the vehicle, sort of as this sort of fun little family thing. And it gets to the point where Helen and her student are in the back of a vehicle, and they end up in a compromising position, and Garp crashes into the back of their vehicle, and it ends up with all of them tragically injured, and unfortunately with the death of one of their two children. The other one ends up losing an eye.
How did I miss that? I completely... Clearly, I was paying very good attention when I was watching this.
The kids look very similar. So you just lost count of one at some point, I guess.
Yeah.
But this is like one of the big turning points in the movie, and where it really emphasizes the sort of carpe diem and sort of forgiveness element of it. It's like, everyone in this movie is a flawed, broken human being. And it's not about being perfect. It's about coming to terms with who you are and being better. And both of these characters are at their lowest point. They're recuperating with Garp's mother. Garp has, like, his tongue is very, in a sort of ironic twist now. He's the one who can't talk and needs needs to write out things, sort of like the Ellen Jamesians. Helen is in a neck brace. Their kid has lost an eye, and the other one was killed. And at this point, their emotions swell up. They have several tense encounters at Jenny's house, but with her help, they sort of learn to forgive and move past, and eventually find out why they love each other so much.
Mm-hmm.
And in that they have another child, sort of symbol of hope.
From there, we move on to Jenny is joining in support of a female
Campaign to be governor.
Yes, politician is the word that my brain couldn't find. A female politician who is running for governor. Eventually she may run for president is I think the insinuation.
Mm-hmm.
And Jenny, Garp's mother's involvement in this campaign leads to her death. Leads
Yes,
to her
she's
finally
assassinated.
being assassinated after at least a couple attempts.
Presumably, I mean, in my head, it's every time she goes up to speak, there's some crazy gunman in a tree.
Um,
Just like a farce.
and then and that leads to another point in the movie. So she passes. She is assassinated. They have a private funeral with the townsfolk essentially and the family. That leads to another bit of comedy with the senile old man talking to what would have been, I guess, Garp's wife's father,
Yeah,
who was
the wrestling coach.
the wrestling coach. He's retiring, and we find out that Garp is going to take over
as the wrestling teacher.
As the wrestling teacher at the university. We also, there's a bit of confusion. The senile old man thinks that he's the basketball coach, and then is informed that he was the wrestling coach, and that Garp is going to take over for him. And he asks at what, at coaching, and then he asks, "What do you coach?"
Yep.
So, yeah, he's
and around you go.
But, and then from there we find out that there is going to be a rally in New York of women.
Jenny's funeral, like her real, like the real funeral vigil and funeral proceedings is going to be restricted. It's only going to be females that are allowed in attendance.
A vigil for women who are showing their love and support for her passing, as she was so important to a lot of women and the feminist movement. That, and
of course, this is appalling to Garp.
Was his mother?
I think he's right in assuming that Jenny would not have preferred this. That she very much would have liked her son in attendance, and in order to facilitate that, he works with Roberta, and they sort of sneak Garp in there dressed in drag. Yeah.
Yep. And then he's there for a short time. They don't show much of it, and he's very quickly discovered, and there's outrage, and
he's discovered by a sort of childhood acquaintance. A friend of his a sister, the sister of his childhood friend, Pooh, who appears several times in this film. Usually when she's a kid, and she's creepy as all get out. Mm-hmm. Very weird voyeuristic tendencies with her, and she discovers Garp quite quickly. She's also an Ellen Jamesian, and they
freak out.
Sneak Garp out.
They usher him out. A young woman leads him to the door. We're not knowing who she is. She can't speak. He thinks she's an Ellen Jamesian because she pulls out the book. It turns out, no, it is actually Ellen James herself.
Prior to this, Garp had written his most previous book was a scathing criticism of the Ellen James Society.
Yes,
and their approach to this cause. How he thinks it's not in keeping with what Ellen James wanted, and it's not. It doesn't accomplish what they want to.
Them,
said, and Ellen James herself appreciates what Garp has said and written about it,
while also quickly ushering him away.
Yeah, she gets him to safety
cab and says, basically in her own way, says thank you, goodbye.
Yeah.
And shortly after that, the movie sort of moves on. There's not a lot left after that. He takes over as coach, and then is it the same childhood friend that ends up?
Pooh. Yep.
That ends up. She is so angry, so disheartened, so displeased with his view on the
book he's written, attending the funeral,
that she bursts into the gymnasium where he's coaching and shoots him repeatedly.
Yeah.
And we see him fall to the floor. He's bleeding. His wife is freaking out. And then they cut to the same scene as the start of the movie with him as a baby flying
being tossed
through the
up
air.
in the air. Yeah,
and
by his
that's
mother.
The end.
And that's the end.
Yeah, it was.
It's an uncomfortable movie, but it's also.
I think
beautiful.
It's virtually impossible to make a movie that does any decent job of representing these issues without it being uncomfortable. Because
it's messy, and that's the point.
The issues that, especially at the time,
and that's the thing. It's not trying to push an agenda. It presents characters who are flawed, but in many ways very sympathetic, very understanding, very open. Like Jenny and Garp are very open people. They're open to awkward discussions. They're open to, causes sort of beyond them. But they're also very flawed people. And I don't think it has like a political. It isn't jabbing you constantly to make you think in one direction or the other. It's just portraying human beings in all their messiness and all their beauty. People
And
who are doing their best
it does. It covers a lot of issues that
and trying to be their best selves.
at the time, especially, you can't talk about these horrific issues without it being a little horrific. Like
Yeah.
That's they're talking about
Horrific, unexpected things happen every day.
and just the nature of society is kind of horrific at a lot of the time, and to talk about that, it's uncomfortable.
Every character here, I think, is trying their best. I think all of the Ellen Jamesians are trying their best. Garp, Jenny, definitely Roberta. Everyone's trying their best. And most of them end up making the world, or, not necessarily the world in a grand, macro cosmos sense, but in a very trying to make their family better, trying to do right by their friends and family, and just generally trying to spread joy.
There's an argument to be made that Jenny was trying and maybe succeeding at making the world
In many ways,
at
she
large
was
better.
Yeah,
At the very least,
her
she
goals
touched
are a lot
lives
larger. Yeah,
and helped a lot of people. And
Yeah.
yeah.
But she's also by no means a perfect
No.
human being. There's that beautiful scene where she's in the helicopter and on the way to the politicians' rally just before she's assassinated, and and Garp says, basically, "Thank you, Mother, for everything you've done. I realize now I never needed a father. You were all I ever needed to be a complete and full human being, and through your help, I've come to be happy and content."
That's a whole other.
It's beautiful.
That's a whole like undertone to this movie that I, until talking about it, didn't even catch. Was that not only does it cover all of the trans rights and women's rights,
It's a bond between a mother and a son.
and a representation of a very successful single mother.
Yeah.
A whole other man.
Which was another thing that was fairly subversive in the 70s and 80s.
Right? Or even imagine in like what the 50s or 40s.
Yeah.
I guess it would have been the 40s when
There was a lot of
she announced her
challenging of
pregnancy, right?
yeah, there was a lot of challenging in like the 60s, 70s of traditional like gender roles and like family norms and all that. We get Garp and Helen have a sort of reversed gender role.
He works, he
He
does work in
he
that
works
he
he works
writes,
at home,
but he
but
works from home,
a
and
lot of his
and
work amounts to
does
being
the
a
cooking and spending time with the
housekeeper as well.
kids.
Yeah.
And yeah.
A lot of non-traditional arrangements and a lot of non-traditional roles in this movie, and it doesn't draw too much attention to that. It's just, this is their family unit. This is what works for them. But
For the most part.
for the most part, I mean, yeah, they're again, people trying their best. They're not perfect. They can't be. Everyone's broken and incomplete in some way, but they try their best. And yeah, that scene with Garp and his mother at the helicopter, she can't hear him over the sound of the blades, which
Of
is
course not.
kind of tragic, but she knows
Mhm.
by this point, how much they mean to each other. And that movie, that moment like gave me a real heart clench moment. Like there's a lot of moments like that in this movie that are quite that catch you off guard, that are just beautifully poignant.
Yeah, I thought it was a very impressive movie.
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily say that I really enjoyed it. I don't know if you're meant to.
It sticks with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was very impressive, very like a lot of the things they talk about, and I'm sure a certain amount of what surprised me was just a lack of knowledge of the history of these issues and how they were approached throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s and throughout. But yeah, just a lot of the issues they covered was very surprising to me for a movie of that era.
And in a way that just supports the characters and the story. You know, everyone's trying to navigate these issues and do best by who they are and who they love. It's similar in a lot of ways to a lot of the movies that Robin Williams chose to do around this period in the 70s, 80s, and a bit forward. You got like Dead Poet Society, which has similar themes about being true to yourself, carpe diem, seize the day. One of the students in his class is sort of homosexual, and through Robin Williams plays a teacher in that film, and through the help of this teacher, sort of comes to accept who he is and try and live the best life he can. And you see it in a movie like World's Greatest Dad, which is another tragic sort of black comedy, sort of like this one. And even at Good Morning Vietnam, to an extent, sort of has that sort of darker edge to it. I think it's just interesting that around this time Robin Williams was choosing these movies with a lot of depth. You know, a lot of dramatic meat to sink your teeth
When
into.
did Good Will Hunting? It was around the same time.
Yes, yes. I think that was the 90s. That was
Ferdinand
early
was
Matt Damon, Ben Affleck.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that was late 90s. That's another movie with a sort of like darker
1997.
97. Okay. Yeah, yeah. Similar vein as this one.
Yeah, essentially him as a therapist helping a young genius deal with the abuse and tragedy that he has gone through by
And one of the
whilst
answers in
in
that
the-
movie is you can't be perfect, but you can at least be better.
Yeah. And yeah, just helping him deal with all of the trauma of having gone through multiple abusive homes in the blanking on the man. My brain is not firing on all cylinders.
It's a combination
He
of
went
Battleship
through
and Garp.
multiple foster homes.
Yes.
Multiple foster homes, some of which were at least one of which was quite abusive, and helping him deal with that and learn that how to sort of start to move on from that, and also learn that love is more important than anything else, really. That the girl is more important. Yeah.
For a lighter movie from this director, check out Slapshot. That's one of the best sports comedies out there, and it's a good palate cleanser from the emotional weight of a movie like this.
I'm gonna take us on a small tangent,
Oh yeah.
just because I'll throw this out there. I'll see if you can figure this out. I don't know if we ever did. I had a conversation, speaking of sports comedies, I had a conversation with some people a while ago trying to figure out, there's a movie that I have a very strong memory of a specific part. It was on Disney Channel. It's a hockey movie, and a portion of the culmination is it's a hockey sci-fi in a way, in that like it takes place on Earth at like a college or a high school or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
The main character ends up like taking like they use the idea of quantum entanglement, and he ends up taking quantumly entangled slices of what look like slices of the, like, you know, the mixed color bouncy ball rubber, sort of that sort of psychedelic mixed, but slices of those that have been been mixed, like they've been entangled, and he attaches a set to his rollerblades and a set to the skates of the opposing team that his hockey team are playing. And then somehow generates like anti-gravity or something. So he's flying around the room underneath the
Oh my
rink,
God.
and because these discs that he's glued to his rollerblades are linked, that causes the skaters on the actual hockey team that his team are playing to also fly, and therefore his team win the championship or something. And
Wow.
we've been trying to figure out for like
Dude,
a while
this is an
what
absolute
movie that is.
fever dream.
Like,
I have no clue. I was gonna say like Mighty Ducks, but no.
everybody says Mighty Ducks.
It's not Mighty Ducks.
I say
It doesn't
like
have
I talk
sci-fi
about like that, but
craziness.
yeah.
It could have been Mighty Ducks 7. Like
I
all franchises go to space eventually.
yeah. And
like-
like it wasn't even in space. It's just like at a college or at a yeah, and he just
Space college.
uses this weird, I don't know. I was just curious if because I still haven't figured it out.
You're
And
gonna have to keep searching because I truly have no clue.
typing into Google kids hockey movie where people fly doesn't give you the best results.
That's surprising.
I haven't found it yet, but yeah. Anything else to add or?
What would you rate Garp?
This one's difficult.
This one's tricky.
I have to give it. So the question is when we haven't really determined this, is our Sheen Bean scale a scale of enjoyment or a scale of quality, or because if it's a scale,
that's hard.
I feel like
That's why all like numerical rankings are pretty
I feel like
flawed.
it's a nonsensical scale, that thus the name Sheen Bean. How many Sheen Beans?
It's just as relevant as Robert Ebert's 4-star reviews.
I'm gonna give it a 7. I think if you were to dictate that you're to dictate that I'm measuring it on a scale of ambition or quality or depth, the score goes up. But if I have to factor in my enjoyment of the movie, it comes down a little bit, and it's a 7.
Oh yeah, same here. It's a very well done movie for the most part. I think it drags a bit here and there. I'd probably give it a 7 or an 8. But it's a movie that it sticks with me a lot more than that score might suggest.
Yeah,
You know, it deserves sort of like an asterisk or a footnote to say, holy crap, this movie has stuck with me for like 12 years since I first saw it.
a comparison I might give is there's movies that people would give a very high rating that I absolutely never would. One that comes to mind, and I've hated on it plenty, is 2001, where I feel like, and you shaking your head at
I'm
me,
shaking my head.
I feel like, and it's a weird comparison because they're very different, but I feel like this movie tried to be deep, and it succeeded, and it did a good job of having some deep thoughts and covering some deep subjects. 2001 feels like a movie that tried to be deep, and the only thing it was deep about was up its own ass.
See, your problem is that you weren't stoned or tripping LSD while watching it.
Maybe that's my
If you
problem,
were, it would be a 10 out of 10 film. Oh yeah, I mean,
like a lot of movies would be a 10 out of 10.
2001 is a technical masterpiece tour de force, but it's also boring as all hell.
Yep, that's exactly.
And it makes no goddamn sense by the end of it.
And it can't save that. Technical mastery can't save you.
Yeah.
In this case.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Fair enough.
Okay, I think with that we're gonna call it for today. Thanks everybody for listening. This was A World According to Garp. Our next movie on February 1st will be we will be looking at Hellboy 1. We will probably touch on some of Hellboy 2 as well. So if you want to see
talking together as a sort of duology,
both of them, that may help.
Some of the
maybe some spoilers.
Best comic book movies out there, and they came out in the early 2000s. I think they're sort of up there with the Sam Raimi first 2 Spider-Mans.
We'll talk about those later. But yes, they very good movies. Again, it's not necessary, but we will probably touch on Hellboy 2. There may be a bit of spoilers. So if you like Hellboy 1, you've got a month, you got plenty of time. Go watch Hellboy 2 as well. It's in my opinion the better of the two.
Yes.
So go ahead and do that. But besides that, thanks everybody for listening, and we will see you next month.
Farewell.